She's there forever.
Okay, we are recording. Okay. So, I'll share the screen here. Share. All right. So, day 6. So we spent, like I said, we spent a good part of this day driving. It was an hour and a half to get to our first stop, which was Masada. We visited Masada, Qumran, and the Dead Sea on this day. And so, like I said, this is the wilderness. So we're heading south. This is south of Jerusalem. This is the wilderness area. So you get to see how stark it is. But here, thousands of years later, they're still doing sheep, right? Sheep, and these are Bedouins. They're kind of nomadic a bit, and they go from place to place, but they.
There's not much there for their sheep to eat.
Huh?
There's not much there for their sheep to eat.
No, there's not. So they kind of have to wander around a bit. But you can. So we're taking all these pictures from the bus. There's a little bit of a glare, but.
Did that last one have one of the shepherds on
Huh?
it?
Yeah, you can see them right.
Yeah, they see the.
Right.
No,
Oh,
yeah.
Right here.
I thought that was
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah. I did this presentation on different software, so the pointer's not as good. Sorry about that. So yeah, I mean, it's really desert. So
Well, but then
look at that.
I see why they were nomads, it's like, there's no place to stay.
Right. And so here we're getting closer to the Dead Sea. In fact, that's it right there, if you can see it in the
Yeah.
haze. And so this is actually what I pictured, kind of more of the what the Sea of Galilee would be like, just desert and flat, and then here's the sea, but that's not. That of course is the Dead Sea, because nothing is around it and nothing lives around it. So our first stop was Masada, and this isn't really a New Testament kind of place, but it's an ancient fortification in the southern district of Israel. It's situated on an isolated rocky plateau akin to a mesa. It's located on the eastern edge of the Judean desert, overlooking the Dead Sea. And there was a lot of, this is very significant to the Jews. Herod built a temple here, Herod the Great. This was one of his big construction projects. So if you remember earlier on in our presentations, we saw some of his big building projects, like expansion of the Temple Mount. He built that big palace in Caesarea, and he built several others around, but this was one of the ones that he did as well. He actually built 2 palaces, a lower one and an upper one here on the mountain, and he fortified the area because it's kind of isolated, it's really tall, and it was just a big fortification of a fort up there. And so he built this around 37 and 31 BCE. And according to Josephus, which Josephus is a really early Jewish historian. And so he's really pretty much the only one in which we have really good, or that we have any kind of history about Masada. But the thing with Josephus is that, he was a historian, but he was kind of a storyteller too. And so there's as they've done some of the archaeology up here, they've kind of found evidence that some of what he said wasn't 100% accurate. But according to Josephus, the siege of Masada by Roman troops from 73 to 74 CE, at the end of the First Jewish-Roman War, ended in the mass suicide of 960 Sicarii rebels, and Sicarii were kind of even more extreme branch of the Zealots. And the Zealots, if you remember in your biblical history too, were Jews that were violently against Roman occupation. And one of Jesus's disciples was a Zealot, and they believed in forcefully removing Rome from Israel. And so, but the Sakari, they were even more so. And so they held up on the top of Masada and held out there for about, I think it was over a year, almost 2 years. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. The archaeological evidence relevant to this event is ambiguous at best and rejected entirely by some scholars. So, you know, it's like I said, Josephus is kind of a little iffy, but this is what an overview of it, what it looks like. And so, you know, here's the big mesas here that kind of stick up, and all this just desert all the way around it. Here's a closer view, and so here's the fort. This is what it looks like today. This is what it looks like today. So, and then here's what's left of the wall that went all the way around. And here was the tiered palace, ruins of the tiered palace, and we'll see reconstructions of that. And it's really kind of hard, of course, like I said, with all these things, with these pictures, to really do justice to how big everything was there, but it was just enormous. And you'll see, because the Romans completely encircled that entire place and built a wall around it. And then a giant earthen ramp to get to the top in order to get in there. So anyway, so in 66, a group of Jewish rebels, the Sakari, overcame the Roman garrison of Masada with the aid of a ruse. After the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, additional members of the Sakari fled Jerusalem and settled on the mountaintop after slaughtering the Roman garrison. According to Josephus, the Sakari were an extremist Jewish splinter group, antagonistic to a larger group of Jews referred to as the Zealots, who carried the main burden of rebellion. And here we got in, so we rode a cable car to the very top. And so here we are, we squeezed into this cable car. The Masada Cableway is an aerial tramway at the ancient fortress. Its bottom station is 257 meters below, and its summit station is 33 meters above sea level, making it the lowest aerial tramway in the world. The Cableway was built in 1971 by a Swiss company. And so here you can see where we're going clear up.
You know, can I say how scared I was? It was just weird, because all I could think about was, if this falls, where's the closest hospital? And how would you get there? And
You wouldn't have to worry about it.
Yeah. I mean, it was just a weird feeling. It wasn't.
It was very smooth though, I felt.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
But you were going up and it was glass all the way around. So
Yeah.
it's not like there was-
You couldn't close your eyes, but
That's
you
right. Well, yeah, I
Are
mean,
those trees down there?
yes. Yeah. So yeah, these are the trees, and this was the visitor center. Yeah. So you could hike up it.
Yeah, right.
No, thanks.
Right.
So-
Of course you will do that.
So have you all been to the Scottsbluff National Monument?
Yeah,
You all been there? Well, this was like twice as high. But it was kind of similar. I mean, it's just kind of sticking up in the middle of the desert, flat area. And you can hike up to the top of the Scottsbluff National Monument, and this is very similar. You hike up there, and our bishop hiked it. Bishop wanted to hike it, so he didn't go up with us on the tramway. He hiked up to the top. He made pretty good time. I wasn't going to do that. I think. It was hot. It was desert. I mean,
yeah. But it's dry heat.
So here we are. We got to the top, but you can see how high up we were. And you're looking out here. This is the Dead Sea, and all this old parts of the fort that were up here. And so yeah, you can really see how far up we came. And I'll talk more about these here, but you see these squares. There's another one here. Those were Roman forts, and they went all the way around the the entire mountain area. They circled it, so they besieged Masada. I mean, it's just unreal. Just another. But up on top, it was pretty flat for the most part, and kind of reminded me a little bit of Tel Megiddo on top. They had some pretty decent pathways, but a lot of ruins. Sharon and I.
Had to protect me.
So, okay, here's some instructions. In 73 CE, the Roman governor of Judea, Lucius Flavius Silva, headed the Roman legion 10, Fretensis, and laid siege to Masada. Another source gives the year of the siege of Masada as 73 or 74 CE. The Roman legion surrounded Masada, built a circumvallation wall. So they built a wall all the way around, and then a siege ramp against the western face of the plateau. According to Dan Gill, a geological investigations in the early 1990s confirmed earlier observations that the 375-foot high assault ramp consisted mostly of natural spur of bedrock. The ramp was complete in the spring of 73 after probably 2 or 3 months of siege, allowing the Romans to finally breach the wall of the fortress built with a battering ram on April 16th. The Romans employed the 10th Legion and a number of auxiliary units and Jewish prisoners of war totaling some 15,000 people in crushing Jewish resistance in Masada. So, because Rome could, they just threw people at it. And so you can kind of see here, this is part of the rampway. And so from the ground up, they built this ginormous earthen ramp in order to get to the top. So here you can see, here's some more, here's another one of those forts here. And I want to say that this here was you remember what this was, Sharon?
Wasn't it an amp?
I think it was like an amphitheater. Yeah, they did certain things there.
People could care.
I zoomed in on it as best I could, but there's, yeah, you can see the outline.
Were these forts occupied? I can't remember. Some of them were and some weren't.
Oh, not when we were there.
None of
No,
them
no,
were,
no.
no. Okay,
Yeah.
this wasn't where we saw any of the guards.
No. And so here's that earthen ramp. So you can see kind of how they, it's still here 2,000 years later because it's all man-made. But it's just unbelievable.
You wonder how many people got to walk up that ramp.
Oh, thousands to breach Citadel. I'm not really sure why I took a picture of that. So here's a model of what this is actually a model of some of the aqueducts and the ways that they contain the water. And so, of course, and I think I've got dialogue in here about this, but essentially, how do you get water up there, right? Because they're in the middle of the desert and they're being sieged. And so Herod built this ingenious system of aqueducts and rainwater capture. And so as the water would come in, and it would flow through these natural areas, it would fill up giant cisterns that were built into the rock. And then they would use aqueducts to get the water up here, and they would use animals to haul it up from some of the cisterns to get it up to the top.
Did they have a lot of rainfall?
No.
Rain
In the desert,
collecting.
yeah, but they would collect it, so you can imagine one big rain that dumps 4 inches of water or whatever.
Yeah.
In a large enough area, if you collect all that, it's a lot of water, but
So how many people were living up there that needed water?
I think it would support over 1,000 people. But like it said, 900 and some people committed suicide when they breached the wall. Yeah, so this model meant you can see the water. They tried to show how it captured the water. It would come in these.
Weren't there places for them, like, to shower and stuff?
Yeah, there was a bathhouse. We'll see pictures of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we go. So the solution to water problem in the desert fortress is undoubtedly one of the wonders of Masada. In order to survive the mountain, Herod quarried numerous cisterns on the summit and the northwestern slope. Rainwater that flowed in the floods and the nearby streams was stored here. The water was collected by a system of dams and 2 aqueducts, parts of which can be seen to this day, which I think that's what this was here, is why I took that picture. 2 rows of cisterns were dug in the slope, 8 in the upper row, and 4 in the paths that led up to the mountain. 1 on the upper row of the water gate in the east. Convoys of animals brought the water up to Masada along these paths. When they reached the summit, the water was poured into a system of channels leading into the cisterns throughout the mountain. And so up here were food storage. So this is where they kind of kept all their, and they were huge. I mean,
And how did they get food up there anyway?
the same way we walked up there, they have pathways to get up there.
But they were surrounded, they were under siege.
Right, so they would have had to have food up there beforehand, otherwise.
And they were conserving it so that it would last.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't remember hearing about that.
I don't either. I think they just carried it for a day on their back or something. Their back.
Well, but
Where did they get it?
yeah, where did it come from? Because I mean, that's my first question is really, how did they survive that many days up there?
Well, they must have had all these filled with food. In fact,
Well,
one
but
thing I read said that when the Roman soldiers finally broke in, they found all the storehouses were full. All the people were dead, they killed themselves. So they probably could have made it up there for quite a while.
Well, you know, you think about the food they had, I mean, it was unleavened bread and butter and probably some fruit or vegetables that they had. Or an animal that
well,
they
but you
killed.
can't grow fruit and vegetables in that.
Well, maybe they didn't even have them, they might have just had animals, bread and water.
And constipation.
Yeah. I bet you, of course, that water, of course, that's what.
Yeah. You can see here's the remnants of that wall that they built over there. It wasn't very high, but here's remnants of that wall, and it went all the way around the entire fortress.
They just stayed in tents inside there?
Well, no, yeah, there we
They
go.
have buildings?
You can see, yeah, here's outlines of buildings.
I can't get over the trees. I mean, I realize they got water where they,
That's
There's a
kind of in
tree.
the lower parts.
yeah, still.
The roots ought to be deep.
There might have been some fruit trees down there too.
So you can see from the top, here's the Dead Sea.
You know, when I thought about fruit, I thought about just berries that might grow wild someplace. I mean, like we see them in greater ditches here and stuff
Could
like
be.
that. They probably had some of those things where the seeds were carried around by birds and dropped them. And then they grew, you know, just out of this stone almost.
But clear up there, I mean, you can see anything coming from a long ways away.
Yeah. How big is that Dead Sea? I mean, is it huge?
Yeah, I got some more stuff to read about that here in a little bit. Statistics and all that good stuff here. So here's what's left of part of the upper part of the palace. There'll be some other pictures here. Here's that wall again. I think, or was that here? Anyway. Here it is. So this is what it would have looked like fully when it was done. So you could have seen that there was the archways and yeah, huge project. Side view. It says the sleeping and guest quarters of the northern palace. So I'm assuming, I don't know, up here towards the top. Anyway, show great similarity to a palace in Rome, attributed to close associate of Emperor Augustus Marcus Agrippa, who was also known to have been Herod's patron. The king's sleeping quarters were built around a central roofed chamber, which, via a small ornamental garden, a viridarium, led to a balcony surrounded by 2 rows of columns. It is easy to imagine the king sitting on the balcony with its primordial view and enjoying the afternoon shade and breeze.
Wow.
That would be quite the view, though, wouldn't it? Not just a bird who was having a good time up there trying to eat.
Yeah, where do you find the food?
No, somebody threw it there for him. So this is a replica of the bathhouse. So beyond the human need for cleanliness, the bathhouse also had a social function. Bathing and the associated physical activities were an important element in Roman social and cultural life, to which Herod aspired. This was where the king and his guests met, bathed, and exercised. The sophisticated bathing arrangements, which are reminiscent of a dry sauna in our days, the vivid wall paintings and the colorful stone floors demonstrated the opulence, the high standard of living, and the importance that Herod assigned to the bathhouses in his palaces. Bathing took place in the rooms inside the building, and the bathers exercised in the courtyard, which was surrounded by a roofed colonnade. In the period of revolt, the bathhouses was adopted to the rulings related to bathing and purity in Jewish law. So here we are looking at parts of the bathhouse. Some of it was reconstructed a little bit. And again, they didn't have the kind of modesty that we would associate today.
Yeah,
This
this
is
is
very
crazy. I get
public.
uncomfortable with the line.
Here you can see this was turned into one of those ritual purity baths from Jewish steps leading down into it. And you can see here, this was really kind of ingenious. And so here you had these clay tubes that were hollow, and underneath the floor is where they had, you know, the heat and the hot water underneath, and then you had the floor here, and then all that hot water and steam was carried up through these pipes.
They're already so hot and they steam themselves. The climate's so hot.
Well, I don't think it was super hot up on top, just because it was a higher elevation, and you had a breeze going through there. Pretty ingenious, though.
Another social law.
And so you can see here where the reconstruction. So this was what was left there, and all this here was reconstructed. And so they were still doing some things here too. And they had, when we were up here, they had some of the Jewish police, military police were up here doing exercises on the top. I didn't get a picture of that though. All right, now we're on our way to Qumran. Isn't that pretty though? That's the Dead Sea. That thing grows there. It's got a really high salinity.
Is that where you can really float easily?
All right, so this is Qumran. It's on the West Bank, managed by Israel's Qumran National Park. It's over by the Dead Sea. It's located on a dry marl plateau about 1 mile from the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea, near the Israeli settlement of Kibbutz of Kalia. The Hellenistic period settlement was constructed during the reign of John Hyrcanus in 134 to 104 BCE, or somewhat later. Was occupied most of the time until 68 CE and was destroyed by the Romans possibly as late as 73. It is best known as the settlement nearest to the Qumran caves, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were hidden. Caves in the sheer desert cliffs and beneath in the Marl Terrace. So you're all familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is everybody? Yeah, okay. Then I won't say much about it, but so many scholars believe that Qumran is the location, was home to a Hebrew religious sect, probably the Essenes. The Essenes were a mystic Jewish sect during the Second Temple period that flourished from the 2nd century BC to the 1st century CE. The Jewish historian Josephus records that the Essenes existed in large numbers and thousands lived throughout Roman Judea, but they were fewer in number than the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the other two major sects at the time. The Essenes lived in various cities, but congregated in communal life dedicated to voluntary poverty, daily immersion, and asceticism. Their priestly class practiced celibacy. Most scholars claim they seceded from Zadokite priests. The accounts of Josephus and Philo show that the Essenes led a strictly communal life, often compared to later Christian monasticism. So they were like Jewish monks. Many of the Essene groups appear to have been celibate, but Josephus speaks also of another order of Essenes that observed the practice of being engaged for 3 years and then becoming married. According to Josephus, they had customs and observances such as collective ownership, meaning they didn't own anything individually. It was they owned it all together as one. They elected a leader to attend to the interests of the group and obedience to the orders from their leader. Also, they were forbidden from swearing oaths, from sacrificing animals. They controlled their tempers and served as channels of peace, carrying weapons only for protection against robbers. The Essenes chose not to possess slaves, but served each other, and as a result of communal ownership, did not engage in trading. There was no need. Josephus and Philo provided lengthy accounts of their communal meetings, meals, and religious celebrations. This communal living has led some scholars to view the Essenes as a group practicing social and material egalitarianism. After a 3-year probationary period, newly joining members would take an oath that included the commitments to practice piety towards God and righteousness towards humanity, to maintain a pure lifestyle, to abstain from criminal and immoral activities, to transmit their rules uncorrupted, and to preserve the books of the Essenes and the names of the angels. Their theology included the belief in the immortality of the soul and that they would receive their souls back after death. Part of their activities included purification by water rituals, hence these big Jewish ritual baths. Purification by water, and which was supported by rainwater catchment and storage. And so here's a big storage cistern. Many scholars have viewed the several large stepped cisterns at Qumran as ritual baths. This supports the religious settlement model. There are difficulties in understanding all of these cisterns as baths, however. Qumran's water arrived perhaps twice a year from rainwater runoff. Water was one of Qumran's most valued commodities, and water management is an integral part of the site, as seen with the numerous cisterns and channels. If the large cisterns were ritual baths, the water would sit getting dirtier through ritual bathing throughout the year and was extremely infrequently replenished by the runoff. So kind of interesting. I've heard some people, I don't know whether they're scholars or not, but that kind of made arguments that Jesus was maybe from an Essene sect, or that he spent time with them, because some of his teachings are similar to what the Essenes taught. So like when he was down here wandering in the desert, maybe he spent some time with them. But so here you can see the caves. The Qumran caves are a series of caves, some natural, some artificial, found around the archaeological site of Qumran in the Judean desert of the West Bank. It is these caves that the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. Israel Nature and Parks Authority took over the site following the end of the 1967 war, when Israel occupied the West Bank and seized Qumran. And so this here is the cave where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And in late 1946 or early 1947, a Bedouin boy of the Ta'amura tribe, Muhammad Ahmed El Hamed, called Ed, I can't pronounce these, the Wolf is what his name was, found a cave after searching for a lost animal. He stumbled into the first cave containing scrolls from 2,000 years ago. More of his tribe visited the cave as scrolls were taken back to their encampment. They were shown to Mar Samuel of the monastery of St. Mark in April 1947, and the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls was made known. And they kept pulling these out, hoping to sell them and gain some money from them. And then once they realized what they had, kind of became a national treasure type of a thing. So the Bedouins discovered this cave in August of 1952. 14,000 fragments of scrolls were unearthed as they sifted through the dust within. Archaeologists who reached the cave later discovered an additional 1,000 fragments.
Wonder how that kid got to that cave.
I don't know. All right, so we didn't spend a lot of time there. Then we went to the Dead Sea, and so Dead Sea bathing is dangerous for those who have heart, I don't know if you can read these, have heart disease and high blood pressure. Swimming on the stomach is strictly prohibited, and caution slippery surface. It was slick. Did you go in there? Did you go in the water?
No, we talked about it.
Several of our group did. I
I
didn't
know,
go.
Shirley and I are going to, and I think we walked in, but we didn't like
They didn't go all the way in.
to float because the floating wasn't
And there were a lot of people down there.
We didn't have other clothes along.
So the Dead Sea is a salt lake bordered by Jordan to the east and Israel and the West Bank to the west. It lies in the Jordan Rift Valley, and its main tributary is the Jordan River. The lake surface is 1,412 feet below sea level, making its shores the lowest land-based elevation on Earth. It's 997 feet deep, the deepest hypersaline lake in the world, with a salinity of 342 kilograms or 34.2%. So 34.2% of that water is salt. It's one of the world's saltiest bodies of water, 9.6 times as salty as the ocean, and has a density of 1.2 kilograms, which makes swimming similar to floating. This salinity makes for a harsh environment in which plants and animals cannot flourish. The Dead Sea's main northern basin is 50 kilometers or 31 miles long and 9 miles wide at its widest point.
I bet that would sting if it got in your eyes.
Yeah.
Shower right away, get the salt off.
Yeah, there were
That's what we do.
signs everywhere making sure that you of course don't drink the water, don't get it in your eyes. That's why it said don't lay on your stomach, don't float on your stomach. Because that water is not, it's toxic. Yeah.
I think, you know, when Dan took his kids there, they probably did go in the lake, and I remember they had pictures and they were trying to float. It was interesting.
Mhm. But you think about why it's even called the Dead Sea, I mean, everything there is, I mean, dead,
Yeah.
dead, and animals can't live. in it,
Yeah.
so.
There's just like
grows there.
nothing at all,
No,
no kind of secret or anything.
no, nothing grows there. It's one of the world's first health resorts for Herod the Great. It has been the supplier of a wide variety of products from asphalt for Egyptian mummification to potash for fertilizers. The Jordan River is the only major water source flowing into the Dead Sea. Although there are small perennial springs under and around the Dead Sea, forming pools and quicksand pits along the edges. There are no outlet streams. So essentially what makes this the way it is because stuff flows in, it evaporates, but nothing leaves. And so it just over, thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of years, it has basically accumulated all the sediment and minerals and everything else that just pours into the area.
But you think of salt as a preservative, I mean, I don't think it smelled or anything.
No.
I mean, it didn't feel dirty at all, I mean, it was,
Yeah.
it looked clean, it felt clean, but.
The Dead Sea area has become a location for health research and potential treatment for several reasons. The mineral content of the water, the low content of pollens and other allergens in the atmosphere, the reduced ultraviolet component of solar radiation, and the higher atmospheric pressure at this great depth, each may have specific health effects. For example, persons experiencing reduced respiratory function from diseases such as cystic fibrosis seem to benefit from the increased atmospheric pressure. And so the idea was is you go in and then you rub the mud all over your body and let it sit there for I don't know how long, and then you would get out, and then they had freshwater showers that you would take and wash it all off because you didn't want to leave it on too long.
I think people still go there for holistic treatments.
Yeah.
And I talked to some folks that have traveled over there specifically for that.
And they had I think it was here, they had the gift shop that you could buy, like face masks and lotions and stuff that were made from the minerals here. And they had one shop there that was producing salt crystals from the salt in the water. I bought a shaker or one of those grinders of Dead Sea salt. I still have it home. I don't think I've used it yet. But it's there. And I guess part of me is like, I don't know, be swimming in that. But I bought some. It's at home in my kitchen.
Is this where that sign was yeah, okay.
The lowest bar in the world.
I have a picture with our district superintendent by that sign.
So yeah, so we sat there and had some drinks. I didn't have alcohol drink though. Some of us did.
You're gonna point a finger?
Looks at me.
No, I didn't. Did you? No. I don't know. Did you?
I don't remember.
I
That's a good
That's a good thing to say.
was on work.
Oh, water, of course.
I had a fruit smoothie. It was really good.
What happens in the Holy Land stays.
That's
That's right.
So,
Sure not a margarita.
but it was pretty neat. So then after this, of course, we went back to the hotel. So that's it. That's the slideshow. This week.
fascinating to me because it went from nothing to a beach with people and a bar and a restaurant and all of a sudden, just, you know, it's
There
a
we are.
different world.
Hi, Julie.
So, yeah, so next week, we spend some time in Jerusalem.
Oh,
We visit the Holocaust Museum, and we go to the Western Wall, the teaching steps, and yeah, I think that's about it. So, yeah, okay.
Fascinating time in history,
Yes.
religious history. This first century,
Yeah.
so many things happening, so many things were happening in Rome and around Europe, Southern Europe there.
Well, and to read about it and then to see the pictures, it just, it's cool.
That's why I'm fascinated with it's a wall hanging, but it shows what's happening in all the parts of the world at various times, because we don't necessarily put those together in our heads, and we don't realize that this was going on here, but this was happening here, and this was happening here, and I kind of like that feeling of realizing they're not connected, but they're coincidental, you know, it's like, okay.
Like the scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and this history we were talking about this morning, just fascinating.
Yep.
Related but separate.
Yeah,
I think that the Latin period, the first Latin season after we were there was the most impressive to me. I just, everything you studied about the Garden of Gethsemane, just everything about it was really, had more meaning than it had ever had.
well, when you talking about the zealots, and one of his disciples was a zealot, I always remember, it was Don Iton who read that line, and you said, he always said zealot, and we kept saying it was a zealot, but okay, you know.
All right, well, thanks for coming, everyone, and
Well, thank you for relocating this for us, you know. We'll work on the infrastructure so we get more outlets in this room.
that'll be all right. So I think if we didn't have Alan on meeting next to him, we'd probably have that there.
Well, yeah,
But
obviously, but.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that this morning.
Yeah.
Oh, where are we gonna meet?
There's a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah, there is.
I almost called to see what if we were having.
yeah, we are. And so we're not accepting any more items, so if you get that message, so no more items for the garage sale.
They're too late.
yeah, it looks like it's pretty full.
Well, you know, I mean, if it doesn't rain and we can move stuff outside, that would be okay, but